Hello everyone, Megan here. Happy birthday to Louisa May Alcott. It is her 187th birthday. So she old, or would have been old. She was very young when she died, sadly. But yeah, today I'm going to be discussing Eden's Outcasts by John Matteson, which is a dual biography of Louisa May Alcott and her father, Bronson Alcott. Now, interestingly enough, Bronson was the famous Alcott for a good portion of their lives. It was only when Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Women that her fame spiked higher than her father's. So this was a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it. It is part of the Louisa May Alcott year-long read-along with the hashtag #LouisaMay2020. I am hosting this read-along with Kate Howe. Go check out all her videos. She is amazing. And I'm so glad that so many of you participated in this. Comment below your thoughts on it. I would love to see what you have to say about it. It's been really fun kind of following along with you guys, seeing what you have to say on YouTube and Instagram and all that good stuff. So I am just going to get right into it, talk about some things that really stood out to me. There is so much from this book that I gleaned from it. Like, this book is packed full with interesting facts, with just wonderful things to learn about. But yeah, I'm not going to have time to talk about all that I want to talk about. So I'm just going to talk about the highlights, basically, or the lowlights, depending on how you look at it. So, even as a child, Louisa May Alcott had a flair for the dramatic. She had a big temper. She had a great command of the English language. She was a very busy child. She ran around. She was always doing something. And as an adult, this translated as well. She continued to be that person. And as a child, her father viewed her as the most selfish of his children. He said that he even saw in her impending evil. And it's like, that is a really harsh way to look at your little daughter. Like, she was probably like a toddler at that point. And it's because he didn't understand her. But Bronson was so interested in education, he wrote down copious notes of his daughters, of just observations of them. And yeah, it was the relationship between Bronson and Louisa really frustrated me. It went from him just totally judging her and writing her off, but then throughout this book, throughout their lives, their relationship totally changed, which I'm very pleased about. Now, one little story from Louisa's childhood that really struck me, that I thought was very beautiful, was that when she was 3 years old, she was by a pond or a lake or something, and she fell in and she went under the water and she was going to drown. She was about to drown when all of a sudden somebody, a little boy, pulled her out of the water and saved her life. And the little boy was black. So her mother said, Louisa became an abolitionist at age 3. And of course, this is back in, the 1830s. Slavery is going strong. Just a completely unjust, evil thing happening. And it was not common for people to be abolitionists like Louisa was, like Louisa became. Even her father, who became known as one of the most famous abolitionists, wasn't an abolitionist to begin with. He didn't even think there was anything wrong with slavery. So it's interesting seeing that too. But I don't have time to talk about it more because there's so many things to talk about. Ow! Did you just see that my finger got caught in my hair and I yanked it out of my head? Okay. Whew, calm down. Now, the other interesting thing about this novel is that Louisa grew up in extreme poverty. Like, she and her sisters and mother and her father were literally starving. They were starving. Her mother was worried that they would die from starvation. But they were surrounded with this rich education. Her father was passionate about education, and he, in some ways, was extremely revolutionary and was a very good educator. Also, she was surrounded by her father's friends. Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, all in her neighborhood. Like, she was surrounded by this richness. And fun fact, when she was a young girl, she had a big crush on Emerson, which I thought was hilarious. So there were some phases in her life. Some very important phases, one is Fruitlands, which is a commune that her father helped found with their family and a few other people. At this commune, they had nothing to do with animal byproducts, no wool. They dressed in linen because they wouldn't want to dress in wool because that came from sheep. They didn't want to dress in cotton either because that was that, of course, slavery was used to make cotton. They were vegan, basically, like at least vegetarians, if not vegans. The only thing that they had that was an animal byproduct was shoes made out of leather and belts made out of leather. And they wanted to get rid of those too, but they hadn't come up with a way to do that yet. So they lived on this commune, literally starving. And at the end, Bronson decided, okay, you know what? It failed. It really failed. He actually was thinking about leaving his family and going to start a male-only commune with his comrades. And Abba was almost okay with that because she was like, me and my children are starving. They are probably going to die. We have to do something. We can't keep going on like this. So it's a very heartbreaking beginning. And I found a lot of the first half was more about Bronson and the second half was more about Louisa. And as I was reading these heart-wrenching things that happened in the first half and how Bronson didn't believe in currency or money, he didn't believe in working for a wage, like he just wanted to get rid of capitalism altogether. It was really hard to read about that, and I was just looking forward to hearing about Louisa. I just wanted to get more to that. So I did enjoy the second half of this book more just because I wanted to hear more about Louisa. And I still wanted to hear about Bronson, but a little less about Bronson would have been good with me too. Bronson was like the epitome of the absent-minded professor. Not that he was a professor, but he was an extremely intelligent person who was not present in the moment. So this quote here says, Bronson was a collection of ideas and principles that seemed only coincidentally to have lodged in a body. So of course, Bronson was part of the transcendentalist movement in the United States. He believed that the body was worthless, that the body was, so if we had come down from heaven, basically, that we were spirits that came down from heaven or from on high, and we had somehow sinned or fallen into these bodies of ours. So he believed the body was evil and that only the spirit was good. Now, interestingly enough, some people have this confused with the Christian faith. Not at all the same. The Christian faith preaches that God created our bodies, that he, chose our hair color, chose our bone structure. Like he created the body, and he even sent his son Jesus into a body to be incarnate on earth, to walk the earth. So of course the body is not evil. But Bronson didn't believe that. So, and it's funny because the day that I was reading about Bronson and the Transcendentalist movement, I was reading another article, it was a Christian article, and it was talking about body positivity and how we need to love our bodies because God gave us our bodies. And it was saying we don't need to transcend our bodies. And I was like, transcend? The Transcendentalists, yes. So, yeah, I thought that was quite interesting that I read that article right when I was reading the book. So I really disliked Bronson for about the first half of the book. The way he just drove me crazy. He should have been, he refused to work. He made his children work. He made his children do all the work. At one point, instead of bringing the harvest in to save their lives and to give them food to eat for the winter, he and his buddy went off on a tour to get people to be interested in their commune. So Abba, the mother, and her 4 girls and a few other people were left to bring in the harvest. Abba and these children. And he referred to himself as a genius, the ultimate genius. He didn't believe that his wife was a good enough mother because she didn't follow his ways. He didn't believe that, he thought Louisa was evil because she had a different kind of personality than him, less gentle and introspective. So yeah, Bronson drove me crazy for the first half. But then for the second half, I began to understand him a little better. So Bronson struggled with a lot of mental illness issues. So when Fruitlands collapsed, when his whole belief system failed, when his whole everything that he was working towards, when that all failed, he had a nervous breakdown, and it was believed that he actually went insane temporarily. So he was having full sensory hallucinations, hallucinations, touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing, all of it. And his brother also had some of these issues. So it's thought that he may have had some hereditary mental illness. Now, his brother actually did end up committing suicide, and Bronson himself at one point decided that he did want to die after the Fruitlands catastrophe. But he kept going, and he learned from some of his mistakes. He didn't leave his family, and he did try to work when he could. So it made me understand him a lot more. It wasn't just that, oh, Bronson, you chose not to work because you didn't want to. At some points, I think he actually wasn't able to. And if he lived nowadays, and, you know, he would have maybe had some kind of disability paycheck or something like that to help the family. But he didn't have that because it was obviously a different time. Now, interestingly enough, Louisa did not really include her father in her novels. Mr. March and Little Women, barely in it. And that's just an example from like all her works, really. The father figure, the Bronson character, is not very present. And the reason this has been suggested by John Matteson is that she was planning on writing a book all about her father called The Cost of an Idea. She was planning on writing this for many, many years, and she never did. But so of course she didn't want to give away all her ideas for this other book that she was planning on writing, so she kind of was saving that for The Cost of an Idea, for that book she was going to write, which she never ended up writing. Now, the other thing about Bronson and Louisa that is really interesting is that they share 3 major life events. They share those in common. They were kind of synced up. So first of all, Louisa was born on Bronson's 33rd birthday. This isn't that unusual, actually. My mom and my older sister, she's the one without the BookTube channel, they share a birthday. My cousin and my uncle, they share a birthday. So it's not that unusual, but it is interesting. She was born on his 33rd birthday, November 29th. And, but then the next thing that they had in common is that both of their main works, their works that really put them on the map, Little Women for Louisa and Tablets for Bronson Alcott, both of those works were published in the same month of the same year, September 1868. So that's quite interesting. The other thing they have in common is the next major important life event, which is death. Bronson died 2 days before Louisa did. Now, originally, I knew about that for many years, that they died 2 days apart. And I wondered if maybe they died from a common illness. They both had cholera, or they both had scarlet fever, or they both had something where they passed away. But that isn't the case. So then my other thought was, well, if that wasn't the case, maybe Louisa, I knew that Louisa had dealt with a lot of death in her family and that it was pretty much just her father and a few others left. So I thought, maybe when her father died, maybe she ended her own life. But that did not happen either. What happened is that, well, actually, I'll get to that a little later. I'll tell you what happened a little later. So stay tuned. Oh, you know what? It is the next in my notes. So you don't have to stay tuned too much longer if you don't want to. So what happened is that Louisa became a nurse in the Civil War at the age of 30. That was the minimum age for a Union nurse to enlist. Or for a person to enlist as a Union nurse. So Louisa did that as soon as she turned 30, and she was only there for about 6 weeks, but she caught typhoid pneumonia and she almost died. And so the doctors treated her there with calomel. She was sent home, had horrible hallucinations, almost died. She almost made the ultimate sacrifice where she almost died, and suddenly Bronson respected her. Everything, all his viewpoints changed toward her, and he began to love her and respect her in a new way. But the thing is, that treatment of calomel, guess what's in calomel? Mercury. So the doctors, without knowing it, poisoned her, and she died of mercury poisoning. She was dying of mercury poisoning for 25 years. So it took her 25 years to die from this mercury poisoning. She was in pain. There was pain with her teeth. The mercury poisoning would move throughout her body and cause pain in different areas. She dealt with chronic pain, chronic exhaustion, all of that stuff. So it's really sad that happened. It's really heartbreaking. But the interesting thing is that, her father had a stroke at the end of his life. Louisa, that was a few years before the end of his life, but it weakened him. And one day he was quite weak. She went to see him and he said, I'm going up. And he's pointing at the ceiling because he's in bed. He's pointing at the ceiling. I'm going up. Come with me. And after that visit, Louisa was distracted and upset, disturbed. She went home. She forgot her coat. She got a cold or some kind of illness, and that combined with the mercury poisoning killed her 2 days later, and she didn't even know that her father had died. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah, very sad. Very, very, very sad. Now, interestingly enough, even though Bronson was a transcendentalist, Louisa had her own experience of faith. I can't remember exactly what it was. It wasn't something huge, but when she was a young woman, she went through something, I can't remember, and she felt God's presence with her, and she said that presence never left her. And so through all her pain, through all her suffering, she felt close with God. And so I thought that was really beautiful, because God is with us in our pain and our suffering and our joy too. But I think it's easier sometimes for us to sense him in our pain. Regarding mental health, since we believe that it might be hereditary with Bronson, or John Matteson kind of was saying that, I believe it, Louisa, it looks like, may have had bipolar disorder. She may have been bipolar. So that's interesting, and it makes sense, because the way that she would write a novel, she only knew the one way to write a novel, and that was to descend into a vortex. That's what she called it. So she would basically sit down and write and write and write and write and write. She would not sleep. She would not really eat. She would go for one run a day. She loved running, also cool. And she would just write. So she would barely sleep. Like one of her books, she barely slept, ate, did anything except write for 23 straight days. You can imagine this would take a toll on your physical health. But this compulsive way of writing, that was the way that she knew to write a novel. And so that kind of is like, and that and a few other things. She was suicidal at one point. It shows us that she probably was bipolar. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it's not uncommon when you read about like all your favorite authors, like Ella Montgomery. She didn't have bipolar, but she had depression, very severe depression for a lot of her life. And so it's like, it's nice that we get to talk about these things now, because this wasn't talked about back then. So it's really nice to be able to read something that was written recently, I think in 2007, and get to talk about these issues that you don't get to see in her books really, except moods in particular. I won't go into that one, but that kind of tries to explore more of that. Okay, guys, I am going to talk about comparisons between, Eden's Outcasts, Louisa's life, and Little Women. So there will be spoilers for Little Women. So go away if you don't want spoilers for Little Women. But if you know Little Women, then you will find this very fascinating. So you better watch it. Okay, so I'm trying to go fast because the light is fading, and so I need to finish this. So that's why my energy is all crazy. Okay, let's talk about the most tragic thing of Little Women that is just so hard to deal with. You all know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Beth's death. And of course, I should have mentioned this earlier, but in Little Women is based on her family. So not everything that happened to the Little Women in the book happened is based on truth, is from the Alcott's family's lives, but Beth's death is based on her sister Lizzie's death. Beth had scarlet fever, it weakened her forever, and then she slowly died a peaceful death with Joe at her side. Lizzie, on the other hand, she did have the scarlet fever. I think it was scarlet fever. May, who is the Amy character, also had the scarlet fever, but May recovered. Lizzie did not. And she did recover, but it weakened her forever, and then she got very sick. And unlike Beth, who had a nice peaceful death, Lizzie had a very painful, drawn out, awful death. And so it was really hard to read about. And I see the way that Beth dies as a way for Louisa to kind of redeem that and give Lizzie the death that she would have wanted for her. Okay, let's talk about Laurie. There was no neighbor boy in Louisa's life. There were two boys that she based Laurie on, and when I say boy, I mean boy. This is a little odd. Louisa was about 25 when she met 15-year-old Alf Whitman, no relation to Walt Whitman, although she did meet him. So Alf Whitman was a 15-year-old, very much like Laurie, and she was 10 years older than him, so she kind of was like, oh, I'm like his mother, I'm his big sister, and she would kind of talk that way. But it's odd because it seemed like it's just weird to like be best friends as a 25-year-old woman with a 15-year-old boy. It's just a little bit odd. Maybe not. Maybe I wasn't there, so I don't understand it. I just think it's strange. She also based Laurie on another person named Laddie. Laddie was her nickname for this young man. He has a big long Polish name, which I won't even attempt to pronounce. I'm so sorry if there are any Polish viewers. I wish I could pronounce it perfectly, but I'm not going to because I can't. Anyways, so she had gone over to Europe. She met this boy. She called him Laddie. He was, I think, 20 and she was about 32 or 33. So not, I mean, it's better. He's an adult, so it's better, but still a little bit odd. She called it a little romance. She did use that word, but she, treated it, she used the word mother a lot to describe him, or to describe herself towards him. And she called him her boy. She did that as well. And he kind of teased her about liking him, but he never took it seriously. He didn't actually really like her in that way or think that it was going anywhere, whereas for her, she would have liked it if it had gone somewhere, but she knew that it couldn't. So, a little bit odd. So she combined Laddie and Alf Whitman into Laurie. Now, Laurie is one of the best characters ever made. Jo and Laurie's relationships is one of the best relationships ever made. I love it. So I'm so glad that she did it. The origin story behind it is just a little bit odd, but I love the result. Now, interestingly enough, everyone, when Little Women came out, wanted Jo to marry Laurie. And a lot of people are like that to date too. They want Jo to marry Laurie. They're perfect for each other. I used to be like that when I was a kid, and then when I was a bit older, I was like, no, I do like Frederick Bear. I do think she should have married Friedrich Bear, sorry. I do think she should have married him, and I was happy with that. But the original ending that Louisa May Alcott wanted to do was to have Jo remain a spinster and become a successful writer like herself. But that didn't happen because her publisher was like, no, Jo has got to get married. And she's like, and he's like, Jo has got to marry Laurie. And she's like, no, I will not marry Jo to Laurie to please anyone. And she didn't, but she did compromise. She created Friedrich Bear, who married Jo. I do like that ending. I do like Friedrich Bear. I think he's a wonderful man. I do enjoy it, but I would have liked to see her original ending instead. Now, I do want to discuss one other death that does not happen in Little Women, and that is the death of May, the Amy character. Now, this is interesting. When May passed away, she was in Europe. She had had a child. Her husband telegraphed Emerson to tell the family instead of telegraphing directly to the family. So that shows you how close they are to Emerson. They are very close to Emerson. And just that scene when Louisa, she comes downstairs and there's Emerson gazing at May's painting with red eyes, and he turns around and he tells her, and it's like, oh, it's so sad. Now, part of the reason why it's so sad is because, I mean, I knew that May died before Louisa, but you just don't want to see another one of the Little Women die. Like, Beth has already died, Lizzie has already died. You don't want to see another one of the Little Women die. Oh, and I was going to say, sorry, I've got a hair kind of like in my face and it's like shining. Got it now. Okay, so another thing that's interesting here is that, so in Little Women, Amy is in Europe. She misses Lizzie's death. Sorry, she misses Beth's death, her sister, and she gets married in Europe while she's gone. The same thing happened with May. She missed her mother's death. She missed her mother's death, Abba's death, and she got married in Europe. But the weird thing is, it happened with the real person after the fictional character. So life literally imitated art. And I know that's a cliche, but it happened. Anyways, this video has been all over the place and it's going to be super long, and I tried to make it short, but it's going to be super long. So I'm going to end it here. Let me know what you think of this book, what you think of the people, what you think of Little Women. Let me know if you're joining in on the rest of the read-along. I would love to have you join. And I'm going to leave now. My last few videos have been so crazy because I'm trying to go fast because I don't have much time. So I have lots of energy. Now I'm going to leave you all, and I hope you are all filled with peace, hope, love, and joy. And I mean that even though I'm acting really silly. So take care, everyone. Bye.